Good afternoon, good evening. Fantastic to be here, and really, I must say, humbling and inspiring to be speaking among so many great, really thought leaders in this field. I wanted to bring, from the perspective of a small practice based here in Milan, Space Caviar, some reflections on one of the kind of central topics that I think has been emerging through these presentations, which is the topic of depletion. How we as a practice can go beyond the dependency on resources that are completely finite. And in the past days, I spent quite a bit of time in Eindhoven, and in the past days putting together this presentation, I was kind of working away at my desk, and in the background, there was this process, quite a surreal process of the dissection, dismemberment of a building taking place in the background, and it kind of struck me that in many ways this spectacle that was occurring just outside of the window it really amounts to, in many ways, the state of what we consider as a profession repair today. This is really actually about as good as it gets, and in fact it's the result of many years, many decades in fact, of hard work on the part of policymakers to make sure that all of the refuse and everything that's left over at the point when the building is no longer needed doesn't simply get thrown into landfill, but is taken apart and sorted into material components, and then hopefully can make its way back into the flow, the stream, material stream of construction. And in a way, that's great. I mean, it's really amazing and fantastic that this construction and demolition waste, what we know as CDW, has been really recognized as a very important topic, especially like here in the European Union. It's regulated through the Waste Framework Directive that attempts to really kind of think about material flows. But at the same time, I think it's also a little bit sort of demoralizing that that's about as far as we can get. It's, I think in the context of this conference, it could be defined as unradical repair. It's simply about trying to limit the damage. And when you start to think about this, it becomes evident that this idea of buildings as something that are absolutely not reusable, but that are in a way part of a category of objects that simply get thrown away at the end of their life cycle, something that's really built into our culture as a profession, to the point that this image, anybody who's studied architecture probably knows it. It's the moment of the end of the history of modernity, according to Charles Jenks, the demolition of the Pruitt-Ego apartments in St. Louis in the US. That we spend a lot of time in reflecting on what that means for the history of architecture, but very little on why that is automatically the default end that architecture should meet, that demolition is actually kind of its natural destiny at the end. And so in a way, looking at this process of kind of understanding why we get, what leads us to think about this as something that's actually quite normal, is obviously it's something that goes really deep into the sort of ethical and ideological roots of what we understand as architecture. And I think that it's important to kind of point out that in a way, it's not something that's always been this way. It's something that is very much the product of a certain understanding of architecture, a certain framing of architecture, which is that of late capitalism, of the advanced economies within which we live, which of course are very much dependent in terms of the engine of growth, in terms of the production of growth within a larger economic context, also in terms of employment. I'm thinking specifically about Italy, for example. Here in Italy, at least 1.5 million are directly employed in the construction industry, so it's very important that the wheels of this are kept turning and that we keep moving. And that all of this is obviously dependent, the fact that we can invest so much of our energy and so much of our resources in such an ambitious apparatus of construction and deconstruction, regardless of what happens to these materials, what happens to all the byproducts of this, is actually really, I think you could say, the product of a very specific set of conditions, which are also directly kind of intermingled with the moment in which we live historically, which is that of an advanced, technologically dependent society in which an illusion of abundance or of unlimited access to resources was being created thanks to technologically mediated extraction. We're able, the material itself, like the ability to extract it, is absolutely not the limit, the way that it has been historically. What is the limiting factor, if there are any, are perhaps in policy or to be searched elsewhere. But the technology is there to, and this is Carrara, not so far from here actually, in northern Italy, which is really, I think, kind of synonymous with one of the key materials of Italy. But if we look much further back, until relatively recently, not that much more than 100 years ago, extraction was something that was deeply manually dependent. It was really something that for many, many centuries made materials pretty scarce. There was absolutely not the illusion of abundance or of unlimited access to resources, and this was really a driving force within the development, within the history of architecture in the peninsula of Italy. And I think you could even look at Italy as a laboratory of a completely different approach, which was that of an architecture based on scarcity, an architecture based on reuse, an architecture based on continual adaptation, such as this amazing site in Rome, San Nicola in Carcere, which is a combination of 3 Roman temples, a prison, and all sorts of other stratified programs that accumulated over a period of over 1,100 years. This building continued to evolve and continues, I mean, obviously even today, continues to evolve. But it's not just in Rome, it's really throughout this is just around the corner from where I live in central Italy. These fragments and traces of adaptation and transformation are really ubiquitous. And the reason I talk about all of this is that also I think it's important to note that historically this led to the emergence of, in certain moments of history, specifically in the moment of decline of the Empire of Rome, which was something that didn't happen suddenly, it happened over quite an extended period of time. It led to an adaptation, a shift away from the kind of the classical approach to architectural composition that was obviously the Romans were very famous for, towards, with the emergence of a feudal economy in Italy, a kind of a diffuse post-empire reality, to a completely different architectural language, which was that of composition. Others may say pastiche, but in any case, an architecture that was somehow opportunistic in the face of a scarcity of resources, so that needed to really think about the reuse of these. And this is something that is really deeply embedded in the vernacular language of the architecture of this peninsula as well, really up to a matter of a few decades ago. And when we think about the situation that we're facing today, where somehow we need to go beyond this illusion of abundance, an illusion of unlimited resources, there are probably 2 main ways in which we can go. One is through regulation, through laws, such as the Waste Framework Directive of the European Union that regulated the dismantling and the sorting of materials in the building I showed you at the beginning. And it's interesting to notice that, in fact, there's a very specific historical precedent in that, even in the Roman Empire that we were talking about before. In 458, the Emperor Majoriano passed a law that actually forbade the dismantling of monuments to reuse them in the purpose of new buildings. He understood the fact that this apparent abundance was an illusion. It wasn't unlimited, and sooner or later the whole of the architectural legacy would be dismantled. So there's the policy aspect, but then there's another aspect, which is that of what we aspire to as a profession, what we aspire to culturally. Aside from what the law allows us or doesn't allow us to do, what kind of work do we as creators, as designers, as architects, want to put out into the world? And this is obviously a very cultural question. It's a question that is dependent on what we're taught in school. It's dependent on who is held up to us as heroes, as examples. And this is the arena in which we have attempted to somehow try to intervene through the creation of somehow an ongoing research process, which I think we see as having no particular end, but that we've sort of collected under this moniker of non-extractive architecture, and started with a book that was published a couple of years ago. Sadly, is out of print at the moment, but we're trying to see if we can get it back into print, which was an attempt to create a kind of a theoretical framework for the legitimation of a completely different understanding of what we should aspire to as architects today, which is completely not what, certainly me, I think maybe things have hopefully changed a little bit today, but certainly not the sort of thing that we were being taught as students of architecture not even that long ago. And that instead somehow legitimizes in the eyes and in the ideals of an emergent generation of architects many of the voices that we've heard this evening as well, like trying to somehow conduct a cartographic exercise that can show what is possible and what we could be aspiring to. And the second phase of this ongoing process is actually in this online archive, a kind of like I was saying, a global scale cartographic exercise of mapping all of the different approaches, all of the different contexts, all of the different practices that have attempted somehow to engage in this question of designing without depletion, that are completing. And this is just gone online a few days ago as a collaboration with Practice Lab, REARC Foundation. And the goal here is really somehow to be able to facilitate access and to create a network of practitioners who can somehow all contribute each a part, which may be very practical, it may be material-based, it may be more philosophical, to the emergence of a new definition of architecture. And through that, to also facilitate some questions that could also be interesting provocations that could be the basis for some sort of collective discussion about what we want to be aspiring to as a profession and what is needed from an architect today. So, for example, asking whether actually the creation of form is necessarily the most important thing, or whether maybe actually thinking about a role of stewardship of materials and of what if we were thinking about this idea of flows rather than being obsessed with the image that will be resulting from all of this. And many of the projects are, it's not necessarily, I mean, a lot of them are maybe what we could understand as vernacular architecture, attempting also referencing a little bit what Professor Lowry was saying earlier on, the idea that we need to uphold different models that don't necessarily present certain material languages, but then many of them are actually really experiments in advanced technologies such as 3D printing, so don't necessarily need to be looked at simply as retrospective or an attempt to kind of rewind towards the past. And also trying to unpack a little bit or to escape a little bit from the corner that we've somehow maneuvered ourselves into, in which we tend to be kind of seen, designers and architects today tend to be seen as the ones who apply a sort of a veneer, an aesthetic veneer to the outside. But then maybe to really jump back into some of the more complex and nuanced issues that surround the built environment, including questions around integration, circularity, durability, adaptation, and so on. So this is also simply an opportunity to invite you to visit this website, the Non-Extractive Architecture website, and to delve around. We also accept submissions, and we're really excited to have built this framework, which over the coming years is going to allow us to really make a capillary cartography at a global scale. And I must say, and ultimately also to kind of ask some pretty fundamental questions about what we are actually doing. And I think that this is this question, I think even just here in Triennale, I think there have been 2 or 3 conferences this year that really ask questions like this that I think even a very short period of time ago would have been unthinkable. And yeah, and of course, the world around is very much aligned with this. And so, of course, we also have the Barefoot Social Architecture movements by Professor Larry, and even the world around itself, because I think that this is a fantastic platform that is really helping in this endeavor to offer an alternative model, a model that will encourage and inspire a new generation of architects to think completely differently from the generation that emerged looking at pictures of Pro Etigo demolition. Thank you so much.